With a dull, heavy clank, the kickstand struck the blistered asphalt. Far from feeling like a hero, Arthur only felt the agonizing throb of arthritis in his left knee. At 82, smelling of exhaust and stale Old Spice, he just wanted a black coffee. He never expected to face a firing squad of smartphone cameras or a shrill voice declaring he was trash. The 1,974 Harley Shovelhead idled with the violent, irregular heartbeat of a dying beast. Underneath Arthur's worn leather boots, the engine block radiated a suffocating heat, baking the damp denim clinging to his calves. He gripped the clutch, his knuckles swollen and twisted like old ginger root, and guided the heavy bike into the parking lot of the Daily Grind. It used to be a hardware store. Now it was a box of polished concrete, fiddlehead ferns, and floor-to-ceiling windows. Arthur killed the engine. The silence that followed rang in his ears, a high-pitched, tinnitus whine that had been his constant companion since the Tet Offensive in '68. He sat for a moment, waiting for his spine to agree with the idea of standing. A drop of oil fell from the primary case, hitting the asphalt with a soft tick. He smelled it acrid, rich, familiar. It grounded him. Taking a slow, shuddering breath, Arthur swung his right leg over the saddle. His boot caught the edge of the seat, and he stumbled, catching his weight against the hot chrome of the exhaust. A sharp hiss escaped his lips. His forearm burned. He didn't curse. He just closed his eyes, swallowed the copper taste of dry mouth, and waited for the pain to recede into the dull, familiar background noise of his body. "Excuse me. Excuse me." The voice was sharp, nasal, and entirely impatient. Arthur turned, his neck popping softly. A white BMW SUV was idling 3 feet from his rear fender. The driver's side window hummed down, revealing a woman in her mid-20s. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, sleek knot. Oversized sunglasses hid her eyes, but the tight, downward pull of her glossed lips said enough. "Are you going to move?" she demanded. Her manicured fingers drummed a frantic rhythm against the steering wheel. "You're taking up 2 spots with that thing." Arthur looked down. He was parked perfectly within the faded white lines. He looked back up at her. "I'm in 1 spot, miss," he said. His voice was gravelly, weakened by decades of unfiltered cigarettes and disuse. "You're blocking the turning radius for the charging station," she snapped, gesturing vaguely to the left. "Just back it out and move it to the street. Some of us actually have places to be." Arthur stared at her. 50 years ago, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago, he might have found a biting comeback. He might have revved the engine, drowning out her entitlement with 90 decibels of American iron. But today, the sun was too bright. His knees ached. His throat was parched. He didn't feel righteous anger. He just felt an overwhelming, heavy exhaustion. "I just need a coffee," Arthur said quietly. He turned his back to the BMW and began unstrapping his helmet. His trembling hands fumbled the helmet strap, and the heavy fiberglass bowl slipped from his fingers, bouncing off the asphalt and rolling into the gutter. "Did you not hear me, you deaf old creep?" The car door slammed. The sharp clack-clack of hard-heeled boots approached rapidly. Arthur bent down to retrieve his helmet, his joints protesting with a sickening pop. When he straightened up, dizzy from the rush of blood to his head, she was standing inches from him. She smelled of vanilla perfume and expensive espresso. Up close, he could see the angry flush rising on her neck. Her name, he would later learn from the whispers of the crowd, was Chloe. "Look at you," Chloe sneered, stepping back slightly as if his scent might stain her white silk blouse. "You reek. You shouldn't even be allowed in a place like this. Move the bike." "It's a parking lot," Arthur managed to say, his voice lacking any real defiance. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with the back of a calloused, age-spotted hand. "It's a parking lot for paying customers, not a junkyard for white trash cosplaying as Sons of Anarchy." She laughed, a short, breathy sound that lacked any real humor. "Seriously, are you lost? The soup kitchen is 2 miles down Main Street." Arthur felt the heat rising in his cheeks, a humiliating flush that had nothing to do with the summer sun. He looked down at his vest. The leather was cracking, faded from black to a dusty charcoal. On the left breast, a frayed patch clung to the hide by a few thick threads. "First Cavalry Division, Airmobile." Above it, the worn ribbons he rarely thought about anymore. He didn't defend the patches. He didn't puff out his chest. He just felt small. He felt perfectly, terribly obsolete. "I'll only be a minute," Arthur muttered, averting his eyes. He tried to step around her, a defeated retreat. But Chloe stepped sideways, blocking his path. She held up her phone, the triple lenses of the camera pointed directly at his face. The little red light was already blinking. "No, we're not doing this," she said to the camera, her voice instantly dropping the shrill anger for a practiced, incredulous tone. "Hey guys, just trying to get my morning matcha, and this absolute boomer nightmare is blocking the lot, refusing to move his rusted-out scooter, and threatening me." Arthur froze. "I didn't threaten nobody. He's aggressive." Chloe continued to the lens, stepping closer to Arthur, forcing him to back up until his hips hit the handlebars of his Harley. "This is what we deal with, right? Entitled old men who think the world still belongs to them." Arthur looked past the camera lens. Inside the cafe, faces were pressing against the glass. A few people were pushing out through the glass doors, phones already raised, hungry for the spectacle. Nobody looked at him with sympathy. They looked at him like he was a stray dog that had wandered onto a tennis court. The air in the parking lot felt thick, humid, and charged with a bizarre, suffocating energy. 6 people now stood in a loose semicircle around Arthur's bike. None of them spoke to him. They only spoke to their screens. "Look at the state of him," a young man in a tailored linen shirt muttered to his companion, swiping his thumb across his phone screen. "Probably drunk." "Sir, you need to step away from her," a barista in a green apron shouted from the doorway, keeping a safe distance. "I'm calling the police." Arthur's hands began to shake violently. He shoved them deep into the pockets of his jeans, the denim rough against his sensitive skin. He wanted to scream. He wanted to explain that his hip was a mess of titanium and scar tissue, that the bike was the only thing that let him feel the wind without the excruciating pain of walking, that he just wanted a cup of black coffee before going back to an empty, silent house. But the words wouldn't form. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest, restricting his lungs. He looked at Chloe. She was glowing, energized by the audience. She was performing. "Take your garbage and leave," Chloe said, no longer looking at her phone but directly into Arthur's eyes. The cruelty there was casual. "Before they tow it. You're pathetic. Look at those stupid little Boy Scout badges." She flicked her finger against his chest, her manicured nail catching the edge of his Purple Heart ribbon. Arthur slapped her hand away. It was a weak, reflexive motion, but the contact made a sharp, slapping sound. The crowd gasped. "Oh my God, he hit her," the linen shirt man yelled. Chloe stumbled backward, entirely unhurt but instantly weaponizing the movement. She clutched her wrist, her face twisting in mock agony. "He assaulted me. You all saw that. He grabbed me." Arthur stood paralyzed. The trap had sprung. He was no longer just an old nuisance. He was an aggressor, a monster. The tinnitus in his ears swelled into a roar. He saw the angry, self-righteous faces closing in. He felt the phantom dampness of a jungle monsoon, the metallic taste of adrenaline and fear that he hadn't tasted in 50 years. He was surrounded. He was going down, and there was absolutely no way out. He turned to his bike, clumsily grabbing the handlebars, trying to right it so he could just flee. But his strength was gone. The heavy shovel head leaned dangerously, pulling Arthur down with it. He fought it, his boots slipping on the slick asphalt, but the machine was too heavy. With a sickening crunch, the bike tipped over, pinning Arthur's right boot beneath the hot exhaust pipe. He didn't cry out. He just lay there on the asphalt, his cheek resting against a crushed paper cup, staring at the front tire of the BMW. The heat of the exhaust gnawed through his leather boot, burning his ankle. Laughter. He heard laughter. "Karma," Chloe said from somewhere above him. "Get a shot of this." The tough biker boy fell over. Arthur closed his eyes. Let it end, he thought. Just let the cops come. Let them arrest me. At least the back of the cruiser will have air conditioning. He felt a profound, crushing shame. He had survived mortar fire. He had pulled bleeding men from burning Hueys. And now, he was being destroyed by a girl with a camera and a crowd of people who didn't even know his name. Then the ground vibrated. It wasn't the irregular, popping rumble of a motorcycle. It was a deep, synchronized, terrifyingly smooth hum. It was the sound of heavy, armored mass displacing air. Arthur opened his eyes. The laughing had stopped. Through the forest of legs surrounding him, Arthur saw them rolling down the street toward the cafe. 3 massive, black Chevrolet Suburbans, their windows tinted to an impenetrable onyx. They didn't slow down for the speed bump. They simply absorbed it, moving with a predatory grace. Behind the Suburbans rode 4 police motorcycles, their blue and red lights flashing silently, cutting through the bright morning sun. The convoy turned sharply, blocking the entire entrance to the daily grind. The crowd stepped back, their phones lowering defensively. The aggressive energy in the lot instantly evaporated, replaced by a cold, sudden unease. Chloe stopped talking to her camera. She turned, her mouth slightly open, watching as the lead Suburban parked perpendicularly across the exit, boxing her BMW in completely. The doors of the Suburbans opened in unison. The sound of heavy, polished boots hitting the pavement echoed across the lot. Out of the lead vehicle stepped a man in his early 60s. He didn't wear a suit. He wore the sharp, immaculate dress blue uniform of the United States Army. On his shoulders, catching the harsh glare of the sun, were 3 silver stars. Lieutenant General. Behind him, 4 more men exited the other vehicles. 2 wore the crisp uniforms of full-bird colonels. The other 2 were massive men in plain clothes, tactical cargo pants, and tight polos, earpieces curled behind their ears, their eyes scanning the crowd with a terrifying, blank intensity. The general didn't look at the cafe. He didn't look at Chloe. He didn't look at the crowd of terrified baristas and hipsters. His eyes locked onto the rusted Harley lying on its side, and the old man pinned beneath it. "Secure the perimeter," the general said. His voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a density that made the air in the parking lot feel suddenly very thin. The plainclothesmen moved instantly, stepping between the crowd and Arthur, their hands resting loosely near their waists. "Step back," one of them said to the linen shirt man. It was not a request. The general walked forward. He didn't rush, but his stride was purposeful, eating up the distance in seconds. He stopped directly in front of Chloe. Chloe swallowed hard. He hit me," she stammered, pointing a shaking finger at Arthur. He assaulted me. The general slowly turned his head to look at her. He looked at her phone, still recording. He looked at her expensive sunglasses. Then he looked down at her manicured finger, the one she had used to flick Arthur's purple heart. "Ma'am," the general said softly, his tone entirely devoid of warmth. "If Arthur Pendleton wanted to hurt you, you wouldn't be standing here trying to formulate a sentence. Now step back, before my detail removes you from my sight." He didn't wait for her response. The general dropped to one knee on the dirty asphalt, completely ignoring the oil and grime staining his pristine uniform trousers. "Artie," the general said, his voice cracking slightly. He reached out, his strong hands gripping the heavy chrome of the motorcycle. Arthur looked up, his vision blurry with pain and unshed tears. He recognized the jawline. He recognized the eyes. "Tommy?" Arthur whispered. "It's Thomas now, Artie." The general smiled, a tight, grim expression. "But yeah, it's me." The two colonels stepped up beside the general. Without a word, the three high-ranking officers of the United States Army dug their hands under the burning steel of the Harley shovelhead and heaved. The heavy bike lifted effortlessly off Arthur's leg. "Let's get you up, Sergeant," the general said, offering his hand. Arthur hesitated. He looked at his own hand, gnarled, dirty, trembling. Then he looked at the general's clean, strong grip. He reached up. As the general pulled the old biker to his feet, the silence in the parking lot was absolute. The only sound was the soft tick, tick, tick of the cooling Harley and the harsh, ragged breath of an 82-year-old man who realized for the first time that morning that he wasn't entirely alone. The pain in Arthur's ankle wasn't a sharp, cinematic agony. It was a deep, nauseating throb, the kind that made his vision swim and his stomach pitch. He leaned his weight heavily against the side of the general's Suburban, the black paint scorching hot beneath his palms. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at the pavement, watching a single line of black ants detour around a crushed cigarette butt. "Medic," General Thomas said. He didn't shout. He barely raised his voice above the idle of the massive engines, but a man in a tactical polo immediately broke from the rear vehicle, carrying a flat black bag. "I'm fine, Tommy," Arthur rasped. He tried to pull his leg back, a stubborn, foolish reflex. The movement tore a blister that had formed against his burnt sock. A sharp hiss escaped his teeth. "Shut up, Artie," Thomas replied quietly. He unbuttoned the breast pocket of his dress blues, retrieved a pair of wire-rimmed glasses, and slid them onto his face. The transformation was jarring. Without the glasses, he was the terrifying embodiment of federal authority. With them, he looked like a tired accountant nearing retirement. You're bleeding on a public sidewalk, and your bike is leaking transmission fluid. Let the man work. The medic knelt in the puddle of oil, ignoring the grime soaking into his khaki knees. He produced a pair of trauma shears and, with two fluid snips, cut away the charred bottom of Arthur's denim jeans. The smell of burnt cotton and seared skin hit the stagnant air. It smelled like bad meat. "Second degree," the medic muttered, uncapping a bottle of saline. The cold liquid shocked Arthur's skin. "Going to sting, Sergeant." Arthur gripped the door handle of the Suburban until his knuckles went white. He didn't make a sound. Across the parking lot, the spectacle had fundamentally shifted. The phones were no longer raised in aggressive, self-righteous defiance. They hung loosely at the sides of the onlookers, screens gone dark. The young man in the linen shirt had quietly stepped backward into the bushes, trying to merge with the fiddlehead ferns. The barista had retreated behind the glass doors, wiping down a counter that was already clean, refusing to look outside. Chloe was trapped, She stood beside her white BMW, the driver's side door still open. She had tried to get back in, tried to quietly shift the car into reverse and vanish, but one of the plainclothes agents had simply stepped into the gap between her bumper and the general's vehicle. He hadn't said a word. He just stood there, his hands clasped casually in front of his waist, a coiled spring in a polo shirt. Arthur watched her over the medic's shoulder. The fierce, practiced indignation that had fueled her just 5 minutes ago was gone. Her shoulders were hunched. The expensive sunglasses had slipped down the bridge of her nose, revealing eyes that were darting frantically, looking for an exit that didn't exist. She looked small. She looked exactly like what she was. A terrified kid who had poked a bear and suddenly found herself surrounded by wolves. Arthur felt no triumph. He felt a profound, exhausting sadness. He wished he were back in his dark living room, the television murmuring, unwatched in the corner. "You look terrible, Artie," Thomas said. He was inspecting the rusted, dented flank of the downed shovel head. He ran a clean, manicured finger over the faded first Cav sticker on the battery box. "I'm 82, Tommy. I earned the right to look like a corpse." Arthur spat a stringy wad of phlegm onto the asphalt. "What the hell are you doing here? You drag half the Pentagon to pick up my coffee?" Thomas didn't smile. He turned his head, looking at Arthur over the rim of his glasses. "There's a dedication tomorrow, at the wall in D.C. The president is speaking. They wanted a representative from Echo Company." Arthur's chest tightened. The air suddenly felt too thick to breathe. "I told the VA rep I wasn't going. I don't do parades. I don't do speeches." "I know," Thomas said, stepping closer. The smell of his aftershave, something subtle, expensive, and cedar-tinged, cut through the stench of exhaust and iodine. "That's why I didn't send an invitation. I drove out to get you myself. Because I am not sitting on that stage while they talk about the Ia Drang Valley. Knowing the man who carried me to the medevac chopper is sitting alone in a dusty house 3 states away." Arthur swallowed hard. The memory flashed, uninvited and violent. The deafening roar of rotor blades, the smell of cordite, the slick, terrifying weight of a 19-year-old kid bleeding out over his shoulders in the red mud. He pushed it away. "I didn't ask for a rescue mission today, General," Arthur muttered, staring at the medic wrapping white gauze around his ankle. "You never ask for anything, Artie," Thomas replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "That's always been your problem. You think surviving means you have to do it alone." Thomas turned away from Arthur and looked across the lot. His gaze locked onto the white BMW and the woman standing rigidly beside it. The temperature in the parking lot seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Finish wrapping him up," Thomas told the medic. "Then load the bike onto the flatbed. I want us moving in 5. Thomas began to walk across the lot. He didn't march. He just walked, his polished dress shoes crunching softly against the gravel and loose debris of the asphalt. Chloe pressed her back against the door frame of her car as the general approached. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish pulled onto a dry dock. Thomas stopped exactly 3 feet from her. He didn't look at her phone. He looked directly into her eyes. "Sir," Chloe squeaked. Her voice was an octave higher than it had been when she was shouting at Arthur. I just wanted to park." He was blocking the charger. He was aggressive. Thomas let the silence hang. He let her hear the emptiness of her own words, echoing in the stagnant air. He studied her face, taking in the flawless makeup, the slight tremble of her lower lip, the frantic pulse beating visibly in her throat. "You are a very fortunate young woman," Thomas said softly. His tone was perfectly level, devoid of anger, which only made it more terrifying. "You live in a country where your greatest morning crisis is the placement of a motorcycle in a coffee shop parking lot. Chloe started, tears welling in the corners of her eyes. Do not interrupt me, Thomas said. He didn't raise his voice, but the command struck her like a physical blow. She snapped her mouth shut. That man, Thomas continued, gesturing vaguely over his shoulder toward Arthur, spent his youth in a jungle that smelled of rotting vegetation and burning diesel, pulling the shattered bodies of his friends out of the mud so that people like you could grow up to complain about turning radiuses and matcha lattes. A single tear spilled over Chloe's eyelashes, cutting a track through her foundation. She looked down at her expensive boots. You wanted to document this, Thomas said, his eyes dropping to the phone clutched in her white-knuckled grip. You wanted an audience to validate your cruelty. So, here is my instruction to you. He leaned in slightly. The ribbons on his chest caught the sunlight, a blinding display of violence and sacrifice neatly organized into colorful silk squares. You are going to delete that video. You are going to delete it from your camera roll, your recently deleted folder, and your cloud backup. Because if I ever see Arthur Pendleton's face on any digital platform associated with you, I will not send the police. Thomas straightened up, adjusting his cuffs. I will instruct the Judge Advocate General's office to examine every facet of your digital, financial, and personal life for actionable harassment and defamation. We will bury you in so much federal paperwork you will have to sell this vehicle just to afford the postage to reply to our subpoenas. Do we have a clear, mutual understanding of the physics of this situation? Chloe nodded frantically, a pathetic, jerky motion. Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I don't care about your apologies, Thomas said coldly. I care about your compliance. He turned his back on her, dismissing her existence entirely, and walked back to the convoy. By the time Thomas reached the Suburban, a sleek, black flatbed truck, summoned seamlessly by the detail, had backed into the lot. Two men in dark coveralls were already strapping the Harley onto the bed, treating the rusted, leaking machine with the careful reverence usually reserved for a head of state. Bike's secure, General, one of the colonels reported, pulling open the heavy armored door of the lead Suburban. Arthur was already sitting inside. The interior smelled of new leather, ozone from the air conditioning, and a faint hint of gun oil. It was freezing, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of the parking lot. The sudden comfort felt unearned. He felt the soft, plush carpet under his good boot. He looked at his burnt, bandaged leg, resting awkwardly on the floorboard. Thomas climbed in beside him, pulling the heavy door shut. The click of the lock was absolute. It severed them from the outside world, from the parking lot, the staring faces, the heat, and the humiliation. They're towing the bike to a shop in Georgetown, Thomas said, buckling his seatbelt. Best mechanics on the East Coast. They'll rebuild the carb, fix the primary leak, and hammer out the dents. On my tab. I can pay for my own repairs, Arthur grumbled, staring out the heavily tinted window. He could see Chloe sliding into her BMW, her face buried in her hands. He felt a sudden, fleeting pang of pity for her, quickly swallowed by his own exhaustion. I know you can, Thomas said, pulling a silver thermos from a compartment between the seats. He unscrewed the cap and handed it to Arthur. But you won't. Drink this. Arthur took the thermos. The metal was warm. He took a sip. It was coffee. Black, scalding hot, and bitter as hell. It was the best thing he had tasted in a decade. Thanks, Arthur muttered, clutching the thermos with both hands to steady their trembling. The lead Suburban shifted into drive with a barely perceptible lurch. The convoy began to move, rolling smoothly out of the parking lot, the police escort pulling ahead to block the intersection. Arthur watched the daily grind recede through the tinted glass. The crowd was dispersing, scattering like roaches when a light is turned on, heads down, avoiding eye contact with one another. The ugly spectacle was over. The theater had emptied.
"You're an arrogant son of a bitch, Tommy,"
Arthur said quietly, leaning his head back against the cool leather headrest. The ache in his leg was settling into a dull, manageable throb. The adrenaline was leaving his system, leaving behind a profound, heavy emptiness. "I'm a 3-star general, Artie," Thomas replied, staring straight ahead at the road. "Arrogance is issued at the promotion ceremony." Arthur closed his eyes. The gentle hum of the Suburban's tires on the asphalt was a far cry from the violent, teeth-rattling shake of his shovel head. He felt entirely out of place, an old stray dog sitting in the back of a limousine. He hated the vulnerability. He hated that he had needed a bailout. But as the convoy merged onto the highway, moving in perfect, impenetrable formation toward the capital, Arthur realized the tinnitus in his ears, the high, thin whine that had haunted him since 1968 had faded. For the first time in a very long time, it was just quiet. He took another sip of the bitter coffee, let the cold air conditioning dry the sweat on his forehead, and allowed himself, just for a moment, to let someone else carry the weight.